Looks like Jesse has already volunteered to be today's scribe. Thank you, Jesse. Up next on the agenda, any new faces? I think these are all familiar faces. Standing item, release planning and updates. Maybe start with the implementation subteam.
I can give a quick update. I think we brought this up last week in one of our meetings, but because of the uncertainty around stack packs, we're pausing our work on that feature, and the next lifecycle 012.0 will ship with a narrower subset of the features that we originally defined. So we're in the process of like buttoning all of that up. So more to come. The release candidate will come out first.
Thanks for the update, Natalie. Platform team, do we have any platform releases coming up?
We do. We're still finalizing a lot of the stuff that will go into pack 020.0. That's still a little bit nebulous right now. We did punt it or postpone the release, and it looks like we're still working on some of those issues. So stay tuned. Hopefully next week we have a little bit more of a concrete date. But yeah, need to reach out to David, DFR, for more details.
Sounds good. I think that's about it. We usually don't do registry distribution stuff, but it's been a while. Any updates there?
Yeah, we had a release of the GitHub Actions, which I haven't been sort of including in our normal release talks because nobody really uses it. But I think people are starting to, so I'll put a little bit more rigor around that.
Cool. Thanks,
And also the registry itself was updated with those new actions too, which is more significant.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So next standing item, our review of outstanding RFCs. Let me share my screen here. Yeah, it looks like it's the right screen. Okay. Starting from the bottom, combine and organize metadata file locations across lifecycle. Looks like this needs more reviews. Is there anything else that we should talk about during this RFC roundup?
I don't think so. Looks like the conversations are just getting started from the update, and we'll push those along.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jesse. Okay. Up next, make build layers read-only for subsequent build packs.
I made a small change which suggests how to like do this for older platform APIs without introducing any new flags or changes, which would possibly work. And there were some concerns about like this moving time from the export phase to the build phase, which users might perceive as the build phase taking longer. But I don't know what people's thoughts are on that. I think Stephen also had this comment that we could do it in parallel so that it feels less of an issue. The other thing I was thinking that we could do was use like flog to log the directory, which wouldn't be as time intensive, but may serve the same purpose. But I haven't looked into how that would actually work. But that's pretty much it. Like in terms of the original like version of this RFC that we discussed, I think I addressed all the comments. But if we are concerned about this move from the export phase to the build phase, making users perceive that the build phase is taking longer, then we need to rethink how we do this.
Yeah, I guess my question here would be, can we actually do this in parallel if the point is to do it in advance of the next build pack running so they can't modify it,
Yeah.
But we don't need to dive into that in the roundup. Is this something we want to talk about more, either in this meeting or in office hours? Or we can
I
just do
have
this
it
asynchronously if we'd prefer.
Yeah, I have it later in the agenda. If people want to talk about this in the shared layer as well.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you're saying we can also talk about this later in the agenda, shared layers. Anything we should say on the roundup here?
Nothing. There was just another concern on how this would be supported in older platform APIs, which I also addressed in a similar way as the other one. That's
Cool.
pretty much it.
Okay, support for structured BOM format.
I converted this from a draft to an actual RFC and trimmed down a bunch of things for separate RFCs, given that we thought it might be better to keep them as separate RFC. So one of them is moving the BOM from a label to a file, how BOMs for stacks would work, which I think Stephen is also working on, and then how to merge the stack BOMs with the build pack provided BOMs during build and rebase. So I guess these would be 3 other RFCs. As of now, this RFC just takes the existing BOM and converts it to a structured format. That's it.
Okay, everyone take a look at that. Remove shell specific logic. I just updated this to change the environment variable interpolation format, but I put that on the agenda to talk through a little bit today. These are not RFCs, so I'm going to skip them. Remove stacks and mix-ins. Anything to say on this one right now, Stephen?
So I split the, can you hear me?
Yep.
I split the original remove stacks RFC into this one and 2 others. I'll put something on the agenda at the end to just kind of chat a little bit about what the different parts are. All are okay for review.
I'm just going to skip over the next 2 because I think you'll probably just say the same thing about them, right? And then last but not least, Joe Kuttner, officially supported utility build packs.
Yeah, just open this, so give it a look. I probably won't bring it up today, except a little bit in the context of Emily's Bash PR.
Great. I think that is our full slate of RFC statuses. Up next in the agenda, remove shell specific logic env interpolation options. This is what I was alluding to. So I guess I shouldn't have stopped sharing my screen. Hold on, let me do this again. Okay. So I just wanted to call out to folks that I did make one change here. Actually, let's look at the readable version. Before, I had been suggesting that we use bash style notation for environment variables, but I think there starts to be some ambiguity there when people are trying to use bash in a command. We might be jumping in there and evaluating things early, and decided that going with the Kate's option was probably more explicit. There is one caveat here that I included an example for. So if you're specifying a custom command in Kate's itself, and you have build packs that should be modifying these environment variables before it's interpolated, you will need to escape it. Sorry, there's an extra parenthesis here that I need to get rid of. You have to escape this reference in your command, but I think that is okay because it only happens in certain specific situations and feels better to me than either the downsides of the bash option or inventing a totally third option that we would have to document and socialize. So curious on people's thoughts on that.
The only comment I had on this is, I mean, if you're putting, like, even if you don't escape it, I think it would work the same way, where instead of providing the environment variable, you would just be providing the value directly. Unless the launcher is taking the environment variable, modifying the same environment variable, and then putting it in the process, in which case some weird things would happen. But even if you don't escape it, I think it would be fine for most cases.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm trying to get at with these examples here. Where first of all, if you're not specifying it in explicitly in the M section, you don't need to escape it anyways, because K8s won't do anything. And then you only really need to care enough to escape it if you're expecting the launcher to apply modifications. So I feel like hopefully this is a minority of use cases, and when they arrive are explicit enough.
Yeah, I guess I don't love this, but I feel like it's a pick your poison kind of thing. Like going with the bash. I think there's plenty of other problems if trying to match the bash syntax, including, as I mentioned earlier, or in the comments, like I think potentially accidentally leaking things that people don't mean to leak if they use like secrets. So
yeah, that's sort of what pushed me over the edge. I was leaning bash before, but you mentioned that secrets thing, and I think especially given that at the same time we're changing the way processes are executed, the idea that someone would make a mistake does not seem totally out of left field to me.
I looked for examples a little bit of different notations for doing this, and the most similar one I could find was systemd. And so like in a systemd service file, they do use a bash notation with or without the curly braces. I don't know if systemd is the best example of a great user interface for anything, and I'm not advocating one approach over the other. But I thought it was kind of similar-ish to Buildpacks, sort of, in a way. It's like specifying a process list to something that's going to run something. But there's a lot of, Tim Hawken has good justification for why they didn't use bash notation in the, there's a K8s issue. I think it's linked in the RFC.
Yeah, I looked up the whole journey K8s went through, because they started with bash notation, and then people were asking, what about this case? What about that case? What about this? And finally someone was like, scrap it. We're doing this different thing because it's very explicit and simple. And I think, all of that logic applies to us too. But luckily we have the convenience of being able just to piggyback on their notation instead of having to socialize a new one.
We can import their code too.
Yeah, exactly. And we can handle all the different edge cases the exact same way, which would be, I think, reduce the decision-making we have to do.
I don't think we can import their code. It's all private. But yeah.
Oh, that's sad. It's private? It's
like
K8s.
all the functions are like
unexported. Yeah. We can copy paste their code. Okay. That's that one. Thank you all for listening to me. Please review.
Yeah, I guess. Go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just saying that the only thing I wanted to add here was like being able to, having the ability to specify defaults. That would be useful even if we don't support the rest of the bash syntax.
I guess, do you want, what does that get you
over having a default environment variable?
Yeah.
It's just more explicit and in the config. That's like one of the issues I have with environment variables in general, is that since they're all launch time, it's very hard to know what's set beforehand. So if a user wants to know what the default value a particular process is going to export. Like currently we have that invocation logged in a label, right? Like we say, this is the process, this is what it will invoke. If we had like a default notation, the user could also know what the default value for ports are or something else. That was the only.
Yeah, port's a really good example. There's some fringe web frameworks that don't accept or don't read the environment variable port themselves and don't have a good file system way to do it. So you have to pass it in on the command as like a -- port option. And then in those cases, it can be really annoying if you don't have the default 8080, :-8080 or something after it. But
I guess what concerns me about that is just like having two ways to do the same thing. It's like if you already have a build pack that can, with a file, specify a default for an environment variable, starts to get weird if you then have another way of doing it, and like maybe that.
Oh, but that already exists. I mean, like, I feel like there are many layers to where you put those, like, because then you get into the web frameworks themselves and they have their own, like, oh, I'm going to look at application properties. And so I don't think we're like, yes, that's a problem, but I don't think it's a new problem.
I wonder if port is really the case where everyone cares. We should just be doing like an expose port, something that shows the default, like as a totally different feature that we should do anyways.
Yeah, I think I'd still want to talk about it. Username, like usernames and passwords, I've seen it too, where the default is just like some, something they're using on localhost or something. I mean, it's not a showstopper, but we should think about it a bit.
I think like the other env subs libraries I posted for Go support this, and like if we use one of them and just simply replace the like tokens for the braces, I think we'll have like all the functionality we want.
Not like 100% of us, but it was going to be so simple. We were going to do it just like Kate's, and we wouldn't need to document our weird edge cases. Like maybe we could just add a field to processes that allow the build pack to add a doc string or something, so that we can document whatever we want in a process without this one weird feature. It might get especially weird if the command has a default value in it, but another build pack is actually setting the environment variable, so it doesn't take place, That's
also weird to me, like where like if a build pack is specifying a process, it should be able to specify the defaults for that process, while at the same time say that, hey, if you don't use this default, you can override it with this environment variable. Whereas in the case where you can't specify a default whatsoever, you have to separately put the environment variable somewhere and the process somewhere else, which decouples them with they're tightly coupled together. Like that environment variable is only used by that process, for example.
I propose a compromise. Right now, you can only do this like defaulted environment variable in a command like this if you're writing a batch process, right? And if your build pack is contributing a batch process, you can still do this with batch notation. So maybe it is okay to leave it out of this RFC, and then we can have a different RFC if we wanted to add more launch features like this.
I need to review the RFC, but what happens when you're running like a CMD image with just Docker locally? Like, can you easily provide these, like if I do a Docker run entry point, some other process that isn't default, how do I override these new K8 style ones? Can I use K8 styles in the entry point? Will it be interpolated sort of the same way?
So if you're doing another process and you set your launcher to be the other process, so far you've not used any environment variables, but let's say you wanted to append an argument and you wanted the value of that argument to be the interpolated environment variable. Yes. You could just use this same style reference, which I think actually does help people avoid some gotchas where they end up accidentally evaluating it on their workstation right now.
That's kind of what I was getting at. I was trying to figure out whether, yeah, and it's probably already addressed in your RFC, so I'll leave it at that. I was just thinking about that.
Yeah. Which maybe is a nice thing. Like I've seen people make that mistake before.
That's the reason why I started this RFC. Like the original one, not this one, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you want your workstation value, how do you get that into the Docker run? And you want it as an argument. I guess you just have to bash evaluate that, right?
Yeah, then you just normal bash things and that
Yeah.
works fine too.
Thanks.
So just as maybe a final note, I don't know if there's more to talk about, but this RFC was kind of what motivated me to open the officially supported Buildpacks RFC, because as I was going through it, I was uncomfortable sort of jettisoning some of the capabilities like the dot profile and the app repo. And after talking with Emily, and even independently thought of this on my own, realized that what I care about is the capability and not how we do it, right? And so I kind of like, what I wanted to do was come at this from a different side, like rather than, like I think Emily's thinking more from like lifecycle implementation. How do we have a better architecture that's more sustainable, lets us iterate better? We don't have to worry about changes in API compatibility and things like that as much. And I'm thinking, how do we preserve the user experience? And I think the way one way we can do that, and what I'm proposing, is by moving some of these capabilities that are problematic or complicate the implementation lifecycle into build packs, and potentially make those build packs even default. Like I'll probably have another RFC coming for some kind of default build pack thing. Maybe Pack injects them into the builder. Natalie even suggested they could ship with the lifecycle. I haven't thought about that as much. But I think there's a way there that almost 100% preserves the experience that's important to me, but creates a better or like a different coupling between, a different way of coupling the build packs to the lifecycle, less coupling, but it also kind of fits with this like everything's a build pack mantra that we have, right? So so that's the motivation for that other RFC, and I would like to see them kind of move in parallel. So
I really like the, sorry.
Go ahead, Steven.
I really like the tools that gives platforms, right? Because as a platform now, if you want to, like, I think a great example of this is like the way we did environment variables initially with strict equals true, right? Like there's a pretty specific feature towards a platform. And if we'd implemented that at the build pack layer, then you could have different implementations of, environment variables with different kinds of security without having to kind of build niche things into the API. I keep thinking of examples of things that we added for this feature or that feature, for different use cases, that if we had kind of pushed them up a level, it would have kept that lower level part cleaner. So like super, super supportive of that direction.
I think the UX is mostly the same that we get from Buildpacks, but I think there are a couple areas where it's actually a little bit better, because when these things are features of the life cycle, it seems like you can use them, whenever you want, but a lot of them you can't use on like different stacks and stuff like this. But instead, if it's in a build pack that describes like, this only works on a stack with bash, then sort of that dependency tree starts to make more sense. It's not like the lifecycle is going to attempt to do a bunch of impossible things.
Yeah, I agree. I think it preserves the current experience and actually creates a like break glass option. Like, oh, I need a different capability for how I do dot profile, or I need to update lifecycle for a security patch. And now I don't have to worry about some other change to how bash works or something. So in that sense, yeah, I think it is a difference.
The only comment I had on that was like we should only be implementing features that are spec'd out rather than any random utility build pack. Like ideally, these should be driven by like a project descriptor spec or something else that's properly defined, so that like it doesn't spawn multiple different implementations which have slightly different behaviors. So even if there are multiple implementations, you still end up with the same result if it's spec'd out, versus like I don't know how like what the difference between the Paketo and the Heroku profile build packs are, or like if they work exactly the same way, or if there are like platform specific histories to each of them where certain users expect certain things from the Paketo one versus the Heroku one. So that's the only thing I'm cautious about, that we should just spec out all of these utility build packs so that there's also like a clear boundary between what the project would officially support and then what other random utility build packs out there provide.
I think as long as the utility build packs we add to the project really just implement the underlying feature we want, right? Don't have platform specific conventions in them, are really simple. It's not a huge disadvantage to platforms that do have those requirements, because they're simple build packs they could re-implement with their own functionality. I think that's a big part of the benefit to me, is that this takes some of the core functionality in the spec and lets platforms customize it more easily. And so I think there's like, hopefully it doesn't lead to too much contention, because when there's contention, we just say, leave this out, or, nope, the feature is just this. That's all it's going to do at the project level, right? Or make it configurable and work both ways, right, at the project level, if everybody thinks that's the better direction to go. But I don't kind of see it having the same negative impact as if we tried to make all those decisions for what a Node.js build pack would look like, right? Because it's kind of going out of scope for what the project is trying to accomplish. Like in the end, if we want the project to stay to the tooling and the API and all of that, there's no reason that stuff can't live at the build pack level. I think the problem is when we push further than that into, trying to decide what a Node.js developer wants or something like that, right? I think we can keep that same rule conceptually, but I don't know if we have to keep it architecturally.
Yeah, I think the trick in the official build packs will be figuring out how to draw the line. So I'm not sure. I'd have to think about what you suggested more, Sam, but like, yeah, I think we need more conversations. I think that's what's missing from our RFC is, where do we draw the line between what's a utility build pack and what's a opinionated vendor thing? So
I like straw dog line here, is that there's certain things that build pack can contribute. And when it's doing that smartly, because it's figuring things out about the app and making decisions, it shouldn't be a utility build pack. But there are cases where you want those build pack features, but you as a user just want to tell them what to do. It's like add a label, add an environment variable, add a process type. And those make sense as utility build packs, so that we don't need to invent like a platform API hook for all of these features. It's basically like dummy build packs that just do what you tell them.
I was hoping all of this functionality could be driven by the project descriptor, which could also tie back to a project descriptor spec, so that these build packs are just a reflection of the project descriptor spec and you're not venturing into.
I think that's perfect.
Well, I think the majority of it, but like definitely .profile is a little bit different. So there are some cases that fall outside, but I agree with you. And like, the project descriptor build pack, I kind of forgot about that, but maybe that's the utility. Unless I don't know, maybe some platforms want to break it down. I don't know. But yeah, let's talk about that.
I was saying that even the profile, like that was currently in the spec, right? So even if it's not in the project descriptor, it's in the build pack spec. So for me, that's probably the boundary. If you're comfortable putting it in the spec, either the project descriptor or the build pack spec, then maybe we could just extract it out in the future as a officially supported build pack.
Do you think there's like the one thing that I think we also need to solve, but don't need to require it to be solved as part of this, is what happens when you're like building apps from an artifact like a jar or not from source, like where you don't have the project descriptor in the after. I feel like we need a way to provide a project descriptor without coupling it in the after, but I don't think it's necessary that we solve that now. It would just be nice to create this whole cohesive ecosystem.
I don't know if you want to continue that, but we had this discussion in the KPAC working group, and the option was you could provide any URI to the project descriptor. So the URI could be like an apps code path in the workspace, an S3 URL, HTTP URL, whatever. And that would be the project descriptor. So currently it's just like a file relative to the work directory, but it could just be any URI. And that sort of is one way of solving project descriptors.
I think that makes sense from a platform perspective. From a lifecycle perspective, I was wondering if like putting it in the platform dir or something like that would make sense. So then like a platform could fetch it or do something it wanted with it, but that's the way you provide it to the lifecycle, and that's where the lifecycle then gives it to Buildpacks. Buildpacks already read that directory anyways, right? You don't even need a new API thing. They could just look in there by convention. Just a thought. We shouldn't put all this complexity on Joe's thing, which makes sense on its own terms. Up next on our agenda, read-only layers, shared layers, RFC.
Yeah, let me share my screen. So I think the only change I've made since the last time we talked about was like, how do we accommodate this into existing platform APIs? And my solution was to have this at exported directory under the layers dir, because currently, although build packs which are published to the registry require a namespace, that's not a restriction in the spec. So someone could have a build pack called exported and it would still be valid, but we don't allow like @ as a possible character in the ID. And the platform API would roughly remain the same. The builder would still be passed the layers directory, and the lifecycle implementation could now just put it in the exported directory, and then the exporter is again pass the layers directory, so it could just read from this. And we could also calculate the diff IDs here and store it in some conventional format based on the lifecycle implementation. But that should be it. The other main question that people had on this RFC was around like perceived slowness during the build process. I don't know if people have any thoughts on this, where since we're moving some part of the responsibility of the export phase into the build phase, people will think that the build pack is slow, or like what it's doing is slow. But maybe we could alleviate that by simply logging that exporting these layers out, rather than saying that, hey, I'm running this build pack. I mean, at the end, the net time it's going to take for the whole image to be built would be the same. It's just what users think is happening when a particular phase is running. Yeah. The other option that I was thinking of was like if we avoid all of this, and if we could somehow lock the previous buildpack directories to be with a write lock that the lifecycle owns, and only release it at the very end when we want to like. Well, I don't think we even need to release it at any point once like the buildpack is finished execution, and that could potentially prevent subsequent buildpacks from writing things. It would also possibly be not that expensive. Like we don't have to copy things or check each file recursively, but I'm not sure how that, like what kind of issues that would cause if someone then tries, like a subsequent buildpack then tries to write into it. Like would it just fail with a weird lock error which people are not expecting, or does it behave differently when the file permissions are set to read only than when it does when it has a write lock? So, and I also don't know how this would work for like Windows, for example. And yeah, that's the other option if we don't want to export things during the build phase, or well, not export but layerize things during the build phase. Thoughts?
Wonder if it's okay if it just doesn't work on Windows for the first pass of this. Like we've lived a long time without this working anyways.
I mean, look, this does lead to some unexpected behavior, which is also currently violating the spec. So I would ideally we should solve it. Yeah.
I think we could do the layerization in parallel after each thing. Like even move it off somewhere that's not accessible to the build packs, and then start creating the layers as the other build packs are running. Even for build equals true layers, if I think that'd be hard, but definitely for build equals false layers, and that would be net speed up total.
We can't do it
Copy
for build
concerns
equals
me.
true layers, and everything starts getting very complicated.
Yeah, don't you run erase conditions there?
I don't think so. So I think at the end of each build, you synchronously tar up all the build equals true layers, right? Because the next build pack will have access to them. That needs to happen no matter what. You could also just copy all the layers somewhere else and then process them in parallel with the rest. But if we want to avoid copying, right? Synchronously tar up all the build equals true layers, take the rest of the layers, move them out, and then start tarring them up in the background as the rest of the build packs execute, because nothing else needs access to the rest of the layers. I don't think it'd be that hard to come up with something that doesn't look terrible, but it would net speed up builds, right? Because then you'd have build packs running at the same time that we're already starting to export the image. It let us kind of start to parallelize something that we could not parallelize before as an advantage.
I guess when I said it couldn't be done in parallel, I didn't mean like multiple layers from the same build pack, but I feel like frequently, at least in the wild, I've experienced that most build packs are not making many layers at the same time. They're making like one or two. Usually one is the big one, and then there's like some little thing. But yeah, maybe we could just make this work. We could even, start caching things too, which might be nice. But that would require more thought, because right now we only sort of cache complete this worked set of things.
I think the sequentialness of the kind of process right now, like is a place we lose some performance. Because we're usually running on machines that have more than one CPU, right? I think the more things, the only thing that's really sequential, that we have to preserve is all the build scripts have to process the app directory, and so they can't run at the same time. Buildpacks themselves could write layers in parallel, but they don't generally know that. So I really think that's kind of a separate benefit from that proposal. Is if we move it into the builder, then we can really start to have more flexibility there.
I have looked into parallelizing sort of the tarring in the exporter before. It can be a little bit careful. Because you can't just parallelize all of it, then it's slower. We're usually like CPU bound, right? And you don't want to sort of like switch a bunch of different processes. So what you really need to do is do it based on the number of CPUs and not just like your equivalent, not your CPU equivalents. Like you could have one CPU that's really half of two half CPUs, right? And in that case, you could do two at once, but you wouldn't the other way. Like there's some thought that needs to go into doing that totally optimally. But
I think we could at least if Buildpacks are just producing launch layers, this would significantly speed up things. We could just move them aside and then do it in the background. Yeah. Apart from that, the shared layers directory, been thinking about this more and more. And given like the whole recent expedition on not introducing complexity, I've been wondering how justified this RFC is. It introduces a bunch of complexity, and the use cases it has are minimal. You could potentially just move this cache layer in the build pack itself and not mark it as like I don't know what others think.
there's something interesting here. What I'm curious about is so I started thinking about caching lately, and I wanted to do this asset cache thing. But I think we have lots of types of caching in ways that get confusing. And I think there is another type of caching that my RFC did not solve for, which is sort of like between builds, Buildpacks want to share things like a Maven cache, right? I feel like that kind of intersects with some things that like would be covered by this, but it doesn't. Doing this exact proposal doesn't sort of allow you to open it up to be cross build because it's still very much in our layer, cache, restore, be careful about what you put in there model. I feel like we need to come up with something that solves these similar use cases maybe differently. I don't know exactly what the idea is here yet, but I feel like to totally solve all of our caching needs, if we did this, we'd still need one other thing in addition to my proposal, which is like the one more thing that people already like, do we want to do another thing? So maybe we need to like think about which of these could be combined. Maybe we want to do something more naive for stuff like this. Like it's a volume. And the build pack tells you where to mount it, and then platforms can decide whether to mount across things, but we don't do the same level of validation, but we also put it in a place where it never ends up in the image. Something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, so in that situation, like if you're running on your desktop in a build pack or two build packs request like a Maven directory, then pack could just give the host Maven directory or something like that. And then they would benefit from that, but it wouldn't end up in the image. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think there are some complications with the host too, but it could even start a Maven volume that begins
even if it doesn't.
empty,
Yeah.
but then at least it gets used between builds. Like if you're building two very similar images, it's annoying to repopulate the Maven cache.
Yep. Similar with NPM as well, right?
Although folks who know more about Node than I do assure me that there are some weirdnesses there, some gotchas if you start sharing between images.
There's always gotchas with Node.
So what should I do with this? I mean, as it is, I think I've answered all the outstanding questions. I just don't know how, like, what people think about.
What do you want to do with this, Sam? It sounds like maybe you were saying you did not want to go forward with it.
I mean, this would be useful, but I think it also comes down to like teaching build pack authors that, hey, this is yet another concept that you can use, and this is another thing that you have to account for.
Sounds like maybe we are not ready to approve it yet, but having it here is very valuable as an alternative and an explanation of different needs that we could link to if we're trying to solve it again in a different proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, because it is very niche, but like, you know, I have one case where this is needed and there's really not any other way to do it other than just to hack around it, basically. And so, yeah, it seems like a really big meal when you really just wanted a snack. And I'm not sure how else to deal with it. I mean, I think for me, it'll probably be like 2 months from now when that issue comes back up, I'm going to open this back up again and be like, hey, why didn't we finish this? I don't know.
Yeah, I keep circling back around to Heroku just has like a dumb cache thing that's just always restored. And like it doesn't tie to anything. I'm like, it's just easier to reason about, even if it does mean it like grows, you know, platforms have to deal with a way to like dump it or something. But I'm like, it's fine. It just doesn't feel, all the ceremony bothers me a little bit.
Maybe this is too complicated. Do we maybe want to like park this in draft and say, well, we definitely want to solve this problem, but we're not ready to move forward with this?
Yeah, and I think, Sam, I'm going to come back to this, right? I haven't had time for it and it hasn't been pressing me, but like, I'm confident that we will come back to this at some point. So, yeah, I don't know.
I think it would be more justified to merge this RFC if we had more use cases. The ones that I think of right now, there are other ways to hack around this. So if we could come up with more use cases, I think that would give us the push to reopen this RFC and move forward with it.
Should we park it for now and just close it and say looking for more?
I guess I'll convert it to draft and say that if more use cases come up in the future, we can resume it. But given the current use cases, it seems niche and adds a lot of complexity.
Do we have a park tag or something so that folks can find like I'm just thinking like a year from now when we want to go find it, like, are we just gonna leave this draft open for a year and it just, you know, be skipped over forever? I don't know.
one of the RFC outcomes, if you read the README, is we can postpone an RFC. Like it's just not a thing we're willing to tackle in the immediate future.
Fancy, we've never done that before.
Well, that's why I'm here, to teach you how to RFC, I guess.
How to govern.
Yeah, govern. That's like I've definitely seen that in other projects where it's just like, this is a great idea, but we're just not ready to tackle it as a project. Like it's just not in scope of what we want to be working on or something. So
That sounds good. And then we can add a label that matches that and close it, but it'll be easy to find them again. So it doesn't sit like Joe's application mix-ins and drafts for all time.
Hey, that's there for a reason. I'm basically just waiting for resolution on everything, on Steven's 3 PRs.
wait, so if mixins get removed because Steven's PR goes through, what is an application mixin then?
Oh, then I'll
Like,
close it.
Does that get auto closed?
No, yeah, I guess. I'm sure Javier has a GitHub action that'll auto close anything that says mixin. Speaking of, should we move on to the next item real quick?
Yeah, we only have 3 minutes though.
Yeah, I think this is just a call to action. I'll speak on Javier's behalf because I don't think he's here. I reviewed it, but so he's got a PR out there that does some awesome magic. And I don't think it should be held to the same voting restrictions as an RFC. But it's a pretty intense, there's a lot going on in there. I reviewed the bash and the GitHub Actions part of it, but there's a lot of TypeScript. And it'd be nice for somebody who's a little bit more pro at that to take a look. Otherwise, I don't know if we wanted, how we want to establish what's required to merge that. Like I said, I don't think it needs 5 core team votes or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like 1 should be sufficient for a like technical change to the RFC repo. That's what we've done with things like updates to the merge RFC script and stuff like that.
I would say 1, but maybe not mine.
Who here is good at TypeScript? Sounds like Terrence.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's also not mission critical, so maybe we just, yeah, I as long as my TypeScript code I review doesn't run in prod,
That's your requirement, as long as someone else's TypeScript code.
Yeah.
Only 1 vote is
is that-
required. We will only need 1 vote required for the bug fix for this script. So I think we'll be okay.
We should, I think for office hours, we should break out or dedicate some time for Steven's 3 RFCs. Just an idea.
Did we want to, I think Emily also mentioned trying to talk about project descriptor stuff as well. I'd like to get the ball moving on that, whether that's we need to do something else or whatever. There.
All right, I'm running out of things to the agenda. We'll fight about it later. I gotta go. Have a good day.